It's not an arena, it's not a stadium, but each and every Wednesday morning, it rocks. It's the Piazza San Pietro, St. Peter's Square, where each and every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., Pope Francis holds his general audience. Now, the audience is not his invention. It is a long-standing custom. But with Francis, the sheer numbers and the vibrancy exceed anything that we've ever seen or heard in our church. Before dawn, the neighborhood cafes and souvenir stands gleefully open, awaiting the pilgrims on their way to the Basilica to offer a morning cappuccino and some religious articles which the Holy Father will bless at the conclusion of the audience. By 7 a.m., when the piazza is open, the crowds already wind their way around Vatican City State, as you must pass through airport-like security. By 9 a.m., there is not a seat to be had, and the piazza exceeds anything that might be possible for cabs or Indians. Those who come after 9, they just stand like in the bleachers. By 9 o'clock, the Swiss Guard band plays, something like the President's Marine Band, to entertain the crowd, interrupted now and again by a priest from another country who acknowledges in their own language some of the pilgrim groups that are there who respond wildly with cheers and laughter until at 10 a.m. the crowd roars because there's the Jeep. The white Wrangler Jeep, the very same, open and vulnerable, in which Pope St. John Paul II was shot. Open and vulnerable, fearless Francis makes his way through the crowd, slow but sure, and to the consternation of his security detail, now and again taps the driver on his shoulder and gingerly jumps from the Jeep because his heart had been caught by, someone very young, someone very old, someone very needy, whom he embraces. And then, of course, yes, he does pose for selfies with gleeful teenagers. After 15 or 20 minutes of all this, he finally arrives at the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, where, taking his chair, he offers everyone a bright and cheery buongiorno, good morning. And then, preghiamo, let us pray. And there is not a sound in the square for the entire time of the audience. Last week, as is his custom, there's a little liturgy of the word, and then he addresses the crowd in Italian, followed by several priests who offer a synopsis of his talk in several different languages. His talk last week anticipates today's gospel. How? Francis asks. How is it that we remain in him and he remains in us? How is it that he can be our vine and we can be his branches? And he suggested, just like we are now when we're here at Mass, when the bread and the wine, the gift of the vine, is offered to each and to all. Francis said this: when you go to Mass, don't be at Mass, be in Mass. When you go to Mass, don't be at Mass, be in Mass. How are we in Mass? He suggests 4 things for us to do. You might say a prelude, a commingling, a communion, and a postlude. A prelude. It is our Catholic tradition that a priest makes an intention for each Mass. Sometimes that intention is a stipend intention from the faithful, and sometimes, like today, it is my own intention. but a priest makes an intention before each Mass. Francis suggests that each and every one of us, before Mass, makes an intention. He describes it as placing our heart on the altar. It might be an intention that is a petition. It might be an intention that is a prayer of thanksgiving. But before each and every Mass, Francis says, make an intention and place it on the altar before Mass. Place your intention in your heart on the altar before Mass to engage yourself, not at Mass, but in Mass. So a prelude, an intention, and then a commingling. You may know that when we prepare the gifts at the altar, I will pour wine into my chalice, the fruit of the vine, and then a drop of water. Now that comes from the Palestinian and indeed Mediterranean custom of commingling water with wine. So for example, in Rome, it is very common because, well, what do you have with lunch every day? You have a glass of wine, but in the middle of the day, you pour some water into the wine to dilute it a bit. That is what we do at Mass. But that commingling is joined with, accompanied by a prayer that the humanity and divinity of Christ will be commingled, and that you and I will be commingled with Jesus. That you and I will be commingled with Jesus. Francis again suggests that at that point of the Mass, we ask to be commingled with Jesus, that we're joined with him as a branch to a vine. Communion. The communion rite begins with the fraxio, the breaking of the bread, the pouring of the wine, as the breaking of the body and the shedding of the blood. What happened on the cross happens on the altar. And Francis suggests it should happen within us. That is, at communion as we approach the table of the Lord, Francis suggests that we ask the Lord to break whatever should be broken in us. What should be taken away? What is it that ought to be healed? What sin? What anger? What frustration? What burden? What needs to be broken from us so that our hearts can be healed and restored? And finally, the postlude. That is to say, the dismissal of the Mass. I say, go forth, the Mass is ended. And you say, thanks be to God. Not, well, thanks be to God, it's over. Thanks be to God, it's just beginning. That is to say, the going forth is just beginning. What we have received from the intention we placed on the altar, from the prayer in which we begged Jesus to commingle with us, when we asked him to break away whatever it is that separates us from him, now we are prepared to go forth and bear much fruit. Shall we thank Francis today for affording us the opportunity to be not just at Mass, but in Mass. And shall we today remain in his love as he remains in us.